The cold reached her long before Christmas did. It crept through the thin walls of the apartment, slid through the cracks in the old window, and settled into her bones like it planned to stay there forever. The heater didn't work properly anymore. It made a weak clicking sound sometimes, as if it remembered what its job used to be. But tonight it stayed silent. She sat on the edge of her small bed, wrapped in a worn-out blanket that had lost its softness years ago. The room smelled faintly of dust and instant noodles. The tiny kitchen was only a few steps away, but it felt like another world. Everything around her felt tired, like it had given up the same way she had. Outside, she could hear laughter. Someone in the next building had turned up their music. A Christmas song floated through the cold night air, cheerful and warm, like it didn't belong in her world. Light flickered from windows across the street. She imagined families gathered around tables, children running around in excitement, warm food cooking, soft voices, hugs, and laughter. She looked down at her hands. They were dry and cracked from the cold. Her fingers trembled slightly, not just from the chill but from hunger too. She hadn't eaten properly since morning. There was half a packet of noodles left in the kitchen and a small piece of dry bread. She was saving it for later, even though she wasn't sure what later really meant. She once loved Christmas. She remembered when she was younger, when her home smelled of sweet bread and spices, when simple decorations made her feel rich in ways money never could. Back then, she didn't need gifts, just the lights, the shared smiles. And the sound of someone calling her name from another room was enough. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Her phone lay beside her on the bed. The screen was dark. No messages. No calls. No reminders that she mattered to anyone. She picked it up and turned it on, checking it the way a person checks an empty fridge hoping something might magically appear. There was nothing new. No Merry Christmas. No? Are you okay? No, we miss you. She placed it back down slowly. It wasn't always like this. Life had slipped from her hands slowly, not all at once. It started when she lost her job. At first, she told herself it was temporary. She smiled at people. She stayed hopeful. She said things like, "Something better will come." But better didn't come. The bills did. Rent became heavier each month. The power flickered on and off more often. Friends stopped calling after she said "I'm busy" too many times when she couldn't afford to go out. Family conversations became short and awkward. Everyone had their own problems, their own lives. Eventually, she stopped explaining. The small Christmas tree that had once stood proudly in the corner was gone. She had to sell most of her things months ago. Now only a few memories were left hidden in the corners of the room and inside her heart. She got up slowly and walked to the window. The glass was fogged from the cold. Inside, meeting the warmth from outside lights, she wiped a small circle clean with her sleeve and peered through. The street was alive. Cars passed slowly, decorated with tiny lights. People carried bags that looked full of gifts. Someone walked by holding a big cake box, smiling like they were carrying something precious. She pressed her forehead gently against the cold glass. "Christmas is over for me," she whispered, though nobody could hear her in another part of the city. Warmth filled a space so large it felt empty. He stood in the middle of a wide living room that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was clean, perfect, expensive. A tall Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated by someone else earlier that day. The lights sparkled in different colors, reflecting off shiny floors and glass tables. It looked beautiful. He felt nothing. He adjusted his coat and loosened the scarf around his neck. The house was warm, almost too warm, but he still felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He walked slowly past wrapped gifts, placed neatly under the tree. Most of them had no real names, only labels like 2 staff or 2 office guests. Nothing was for him. He poured himself a drink and held the glass without sipping it. He stared at the lights, the decorations, the perfect world he had built around himself. Everything people dreamed of was there: success, power, luxury, silence. He laughed quietly. Not a happy laugh. A tired one. There had been a time when Christmas meant something to him too. When his home was smaller and noisier, when someone used to tell him to sit down and eat, when laughter was loud enough to fill the walls, that time felt far away now. His phone buzzed. Another message from a business contact. Another holiday greeting that felt copied and pasted. He locked the screen without replying and placed the phone down. He didn't want dinner. He didn't want the party his assistants had planned. He didn't want company that talked about profits and numbers. He just wanted to breathe somewhere real. Minutes later, he was in his car, moving through quiet streets. No driver. He preferred it that way when he needed to think. The city looked different from inside his expensive car. Brighter, happier, more alive. He drove without a plan. Meanwhile, back in the small apartment, she wrapped her blanket tighter and sat down at the tiny table near the kitchen. She opened the packet of noodles and stared at it like it might disappear if she blinked. She added hot water and waited in silence. The room felt heavier at night. Every sound seemed louder. The hum of the street below, the faint voices of neighbors, the wind brushing against the window. She thought about knocking on someone's door. She shook the thought away. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to feel small. She ate slowly, trying to make the meal last longer than it really could. Each bite was warm, but her heart stayed cold. Her eyes drifted back to the window again and again, like she was waiting for something to change. But nothing did. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second sounded like a reminder of time. Moving forward, while her life stayed still, she finished eating and cleaned the cup carefully. As if taking care of small things made her feel a little more human, then she sat on the bed again and pulled a blanket close. Outside, snow began to fall lightly. Tiny white flakes drifted down from the dark sky, soft and quiet. She watched them through the glass. They looked peaceful, like they belonged to a kinder world. She didn't know that across the city, a man in a warm car was slowing down at a red light, just a few streets away. She didn't know that he was staring out of his window. Not at the flashy lights, but at a small building where one window glowed faintly. She didn't know that this simple night, which felt like the end of everything, was quietly becoming the beginning of something else. For now, she only knew one thing. She believed Christmas was over, and she had no idea that a single moment was waiting to change it all. She stepped out into the street, pulling her coat tightly around her. The snow had started to settle, turning the sidewalks into soft, uneven carpets of white. Each step made a quiet, crunching sound, echoing through the empty streets. The city looked different at night in winter. Lights reflected off the snow, painting everything in shades of gold and blue, but it didn't feel magical to her. It felt cold, lonely, and distant. She had no real destination in mind. Sometimes walking aimlessly helped to push thoughts away. She wandered past the small shops, most of them closed and dark. The windows decorated with cheerful Christmas displays that seemed to mock her. She stopped for a moment to watch a little toy train spinning around a track in a shop window. A small smile flickered across her face, but it faded quickly. She touched the glass lightly, wishing for a moment that it could somehow be hers. The sound of laughter and chatter drifted from somewhere nearby, pulling her down a quieter street. There, tucked between two larger buildings, was a small cafe with a soft light spilling onto the sidewalk. The aroma of coffee and warm pastries reached her instantly, stirring something deep inside her. She hesitated at the door. Places like this usually meant crowds, noise, and too many people who might notice her worn shoes and tired expression. But tonight, something made her push the door open. Inside, the cafe was nearly empty. Only a few tables were occupied, each one lit by a small flickering candle. The warmth hit her immediately, and for the first time in hours, she felt her hands stop trembling from the cold. She slid into a chair near the window, watching snowflakes stick to the glass. She didn't know why she felt drawn to this place. Something about it felt safe, like a pause in the world outside. He entered the cafe a few minutes later. He wore a long coat and a scarf that suggested he belonged somewhere colder, somewhere prepared. His movements were smooth, deliberate, almost practiced, as if he had done this hundreds of times. Yet there was a tension about him, something restless in the way he glanced around the room. He ordered a coffee and walked to a table not far from her own. She noticed him, but she didn't look too closely. She had learned long ago not to stare at strangers, even if their presence felt significant. Still, there was something about the way he held himself, quiet yet commanding, that made her glance up again. He didn't see her, or at least he didn't seem to. He was looking out of the window, watching the snow fall, lost in thought. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Every sound in the cafe felt amplified, the quiet chatter, clinking of cups, the soft music playing from a corner speaker. She wondered about the people outside, hurrying to their homes, to their families, to warmth and comfort she didn't have. A pang of sadness ran through her chest. Suddenly, the chair next to her creaked as someone stumbled slightly. She looked up just in time to see him dropping his wallet. Coins spilled across the floor, clattering softly. Without thinking, she reached down and picked them up, placing them gently back into his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of surprise. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she noticed the tiredness in them, a fatigue that didn't come from walking in the cold. "You're welcome," she said softly, feeling the oddest mix of caution and curiosity. There was something about him that didn't fit the usual strangers she encountered. He sat down heavily, not at her table, but close enough that their presence in the same space felt connected. For a moment, they just sat there, each in their own thoughts, listening to the soft hum of the cafe and watching the snow fall outside. "First snowfall this year," he said after a while, almost to himself. She glanced at him and then back at the window. "Yeah," she replied. "It makes everything look different." "Different can be good," he said. His tone wasn't boastful or rich with privilege. It was quiet, almost like he was trying to convince himself. She turned toward him fully now, curiosity getting the better of her. "Different can be hard too," she said. "Sometimes it just reminds you of everything you don't have." He nodded slowly. "I know that feeling," he admitted. There was no pride in his voice, no pretense. Just honesty. The conversation paused, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt real. She realized she hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, maybe months. She didn't even remember what it felt like to be heard without judgment or expectation. A waiter came by, and he ordered another coffee. She watched him, noticing the subtle way he interacted with people. Not distant, but polite, careful. He seemed aware of every detail around him, yet he didn't demand attention. There was something strangely human in that. Something she didn't expect from a person who clearly had a different life. Minutes passed. They didn't speak much, but each time she glanced at him, she felt a little more grounded. The world outside still moved too fast. Too bright, too cruel at times, but here, in this small cafe, with warm light and the faint smell of coffee, it felt like time had slowed down at one point. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small notebook. He wrote something quickly, almost absent-mindedly, before closing it again. She noticed it, but didn't ask. She sensed that, like her, he had his own reasons for being here. Reasons he couldn't or didn't want to explain yet. A child ran past outside, laughing, dragging a small sled. She smiled faintly, remembering similar laughter from years ago. He glanced toward the window too, his expression softening. They didn't speak, but the small, shared moment made the silence less heavy. When she got up to leave, thinking it was time to return to the cold apartment and the loneliness waiting there, he stood as well. For a brief second, their eyes met, and there was a recognition not of wealth or status, not of past or future, but of two people simply existing in the same moment. Both aware of the quiet weight each carried, she hesitated at the door. "Thank you," she said again, more to herself than to him. He nodded, a faint smile appearing. "Be careful out there," he said. His voice had a gentleness she hadn't expected. As she stepped back into the snow, the cold hitting her cheeks, she realized something strange had happened. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely invisible. For a short while, she had been seen, acknowledged. even if only by a stranger in a quiet cafe on a snowy night. Meanwhile, he watched her leave, noticing the way she moved, the careful way she balanced herself on the uneven sidewalks. He felt a pull he couldn't explain, a curiosity about the quiet strength in her. In his life filled with power, wealth, and control, this small, unassuming moment felt more significant than anything else he had experienced in a long time. The city around them continued as if nothing had changed. Lights flickered, cars passed, people rushed to their destinations, and snow continued to fall gently from the sky. But for two people who had been quietly carrying heavy burdens, the night had shifted. Something subtle, fragile, and real had begun. The first thread of connection between lives that would soon change in ways neither could yet imagine. She walked home slowly, leaving faint footprints in the snow. She didn't know what would happen next, or if this brief encounter would mean anything at all. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she allowed herself a small spark of hope somewhere behind her. He returned to the cafe briefly, watching the door she had just passed through. He didn't move to follow. He simply stayed for a moment, considering how strange life could be, how fleeting moments of human connection could leave impressions far deeper than any gift or wealth. The snow continued to fall, soft and quiet, covering the streets and buildings in a gentle blanket. It hid the harshness of the city just enough to remind both of them that even in cold, lonely nights, something unexpected could happen, something that felt like warmth, and though neither of them knew it yet, the night had only just begun. The snow had stopped falling by the time she returned to the small apartment. Leaving the streets quiet and still, the city seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. She kicked off her wet shoes and hung her coat by the door, taking a deep breath as she sank into the chair near the table. The warmth of the apartment was modest at best, but it felt like a small island of comfort compared to the icy streets outside. She opened the small notebook she kept tucked away in a drawer. It wasn't much, just a few pages filled with scribbled thoughts, reminders, and sketches she had made over the past few months. Writing had become her quiet companion. She had long stopped sharing it with anyone, knowing that no one seemed to care anymore. But tonight, for some reason, she wanted to write about the cafe, about the stranger who had quietly entered her world, if only for a brief moment. She wrote slowly, carefully choosing her words, trying to capture the warmth she had felt. It wasn't just the coffee or the candles. It was the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something deeper, something human. She paused, staring at the page. She didn't understand why it mattered so much, why a few simple moments of kindness could feel like sunlight breaking through months of gray clouds. Meanwhile, across the city, he was sitting in his car, parked near a quiet street. He hadn't gone back to the warmth of his home yet. Instead, he had driven aimlessly, letting the city's lights pass by without notice. The encounter in the cafe played over and over in his mind, each detail sharp and clear. The way she had helped him without hesitation, the quiet way she moved, the honesty in her eyes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had affected him this way, someone who wasn't part of his world, someone who didn't belong to the network of wealth and power he had spent years building. He was used to control, used to people acting in ways that served him. But she had offered nothing except kindness, nothing except presence, and it had felt like a lifeline. He realized he wanted to see her again, not out of obligation or curiosity or even attraction, at least not in the way he was accustomed to feeling it, but because it felt necessary, like a missing piece of something he had long forgotten. The next morning, she woke to the sound of a weak sunlight trying to break through the curtains. The apartment was still cold, but the air seemed a little lighter. She moved slowly, making herself some tea and staring out the window at the faint traces of snow left on the streets. She thought about the night before, about the cafe, about the stranger. She felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. People like him didn't normally notice people like her, and yet he had noticed her routine continued, small and careful. She swept the floor, washed her few dishes, and checked her small savings account online. The numbers didn't inspire hope, they barely changed, but she moved through the motions without despair this time. She felt a quiet strength building inside her, subtle energy she hadn't felt in weeks. Later that day, she returned to the cafe, almost without thinking. She didn't know why. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a quiet need to see him again, to confirm that the connection she had felt wasn't just a fleeting dream. The bell above the door rang softly when she entered. The cafe was brighter now in the daytime, filled with the smell of fresh pastries and coffee. She sat near the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, waiting and watching. He arrived not long after, slipping into the same seat as the night before. He ordered his coffee and smiled faintly at her, as if acknowledging an unspoken bond. This time she smiled back, small and cautious but genuine. They didn't speak immediately. Words weren't needed yet. They existed in the same space, quiet companions who understood the weight each carried. Eventually, he spoke. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said almost shyly. "I didn't expect to come either," she admitted. Her voice was soft but steady. "I guess I wanted to see if you were real?" He chuckled quietly. "I am," he said, though it sounded like he was confirming it more to himself than to her. They started talking slowly. About small things at first. The weather, the cafe, the snow. She noticed that he didn't talk about his wealth or his life in the spotlight. He didn't need to. He spoke as a human being, stripped of all the labels that usually defined him. And for the first time in years, she didn't have to hide who she was. She could speak honestly, without fear of judgment. Then, without warning, he shared something heavier. A phone call he had received the night before, the one that had left him quiet and distant in the cafe. It was news about someone close to him, someone whose life had changed suddenly. He admitted that he had felt powerless, scared, and alone. Her reaction surprised him. She didn't flinch or recoil. She didn't treat him differently. She just listened, her eyes steady, her hands folded around her cup. She offered a few words, not platitudes, not advice, just kindness and understanding. It was enough. For a long time they sat like that, two people who had been burdened by life, sharing a quiet human connection that neither had expected. The cafe buzzed faintly around them, but inside their small bubble, the world was still. It was simple, real, and healing. Hours passed. Outside, the day shifted toward evening. The sky turned pale and gray, shadows stretching across the streets. She realized she hadn't thought about her apartment or the cold waiting for her outside. She didn't feel lonely. She didn't feel small. She felt human again. He noticed the change too, the way she carried herself, the subtle strength in her eyes. He realized that she had survived much more than he could imagine, and yet she retained her kindness, her warmth, her ability to see humanity even in someone she barely knew. It humbled him. At one point, a small accident happened. A waitress tripped near their table, dropping a tray of cups. She rushed to help, steadying the tray and offering a reassuring smile. He watched her, silently, heart quietly moved. She didn't think twice. She didn't hesitate. She acted because it was right. It's not because anyone was watching. It reminded him of how much he had forgotten about life outside his world. Small acts of human kindness, small gestures of care, they mattered more than anything money could buy. And he realized he had found someone who carried that in abundance, someone rare and real. As the cafe started to close for the evening, they rose to leave. Outside, the streets were quiet again, dusted with a thin layer of fresh snow. She shivered slightly, and he instinctively offered his coat. She hesitated, then accepted it. Not because she needed it, but because it was a gesture of care, something she hadn't felt in a long time. They walked together through the streets, side by side, neither speaking at first. The air was cold, but the presence of another human being, someone who understood without words, made it feel less harsh. Every step felt lighter than it should have, as if the city itself had softened around them. Finally, she stopped at a corner near her apartment. She turned to him, uncertain. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more certainty. "For today, for everything." He looked at her, his expression serious but gentle. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you. For being you." For a moment, they just stood there, two strangers connected by a fragile thread of trust, kindness, and shared humanity. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coat he had given her. It was a warmth that came from being seen, understood, and accepted. She stepped inside her building, glancing back once. He watched her disappear into the hallway, feeling a quiet ache, a desire to remain part of this small, human world he had glimpsed in her presence. That night, both of them reflected on the day, on the cafe, on the small connection that had grown stronger in a few short hours. She wrote in her notebook again, describing the way someone could touch your life without asking for anything in return. He sat quietly in his large, empty home, considering the strange way life sometimes led you to the people who mattered most. Even when you least expected it, neither of them knew what would come next. They didn't know how the story of that snowy evening in the cafe would unfold, but they carried the memory, the small miracle of human connection, as a light against the loneliness that had shadowed them for so long. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time in years, he felt alive in a way money had never given him. And the night had only just begun. The day after their walk through the snow, she woke to the usual gray light filtering through the curtains. The apartment was quiet, but there was a lingering warmth from the small connection she had shared the night before. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. She moved slowly, making tea, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Every little sound reminded her of yesterday, of the cafe, of him. She wondered if he had thought about her too, or if she had been just another fleeting moment for him. She tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on small tasks, cleaning the kitchen, folding a few clothes, checking her mailbox. Nothing there. No letters, no messages, nothing. Yet the memory of his eyes, calm and human, stayed with her, a quiet anchor against the loneliness that usually ruled her life. Meanwhile, across the city, he moved through his day differently than usual. Meetings felt smaller, emails less urgent, his large office colder than it had before. He couldn't stop thinking about her presence in the cafe, her kindness, her quiet strength. He had told himself that their encounter had been accidental, nothing more than a passing moment. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, heard her voice. He found himself driving toward the cafe again. Not with a plan, just a pull he didn't fully understand. She was there, as if she had known he might come, sitting near the window with her notebook open. She looked up briefly and their eyes met. In that instant, the world felt smaller, simpler, warmer. They didn't speak immediately. Words felt unnecessary. They had already shared something that didn't need explanation, a quiet understanding, recognition of each other's presence, of each other's humanity. He sat down across from her and ordered a coffee. Watching her stir her cup slowly, then something happened that changed everything. While she was reaching for her notebook, her hand brushed against a small envelope that had slipped from his coat pocket as he sat down. She picked it up instinctively, curious, and looked at him. He hesitated, then nodded. "Open it," he said softly. Inside, she found a note written in careful, neat handwriting. It said simply, "You are seen. Not for what you have, not for what you lack. Just for you, someone who cares." She looked up at him, surprised and confused. Who is this?" He smiled faintly, but there was something serious in his eyes. "It's me," he admitted. "I didn't want to overwhelm you or make you feel indebted, but I wanted you to know that I see you, all of you." She blinked, trying to process it. "But why?" "Because no one else does," he said quietly. "At least, not in the way they should. And because I can't stop thinking about you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had imagined many things about him, had wondered if he might be kind, curious, even human beneath all the wealth and distance, but she hadn't expected honesty like this. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not a stranger, not a wealthy man from another world, but someone who had carried his own burdens, someone who could be hurt, someone who could care. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," he replied. "Just Listen." And so they sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. The faint hum of the cafe, the soft rustle of the wind outside, the clinking of cups, they all faded into the background as they simply existed together. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out his hand across the table. His gesture was simple, human, nothing grand or forced. "Take my hand," he said. She froze, unsure, her mind racing. People like him didn't normally do things like this. She was supposed to be cautious. She was supposed to walk away. But something in the way he looked at her, vulnerable, sincere, made her move forward. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The warmth from his hand spread into her fingers, up her arm, and somehow into her chest. She felt grounded in a way she hadn't felt in years. For a long time she had carried the cold, the loneliness, the fear of being invisible. And now, just like that, someone was holding her. Not because he owed her anything, not because he wanted something, but simply because he cared. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw honesty, concern, and a quiet hope. "I don't want to frighten you," he said softly. "I just want you to know that you matter, that your life matters. And if you'll let me, I want to be here for you. Not to fix everything, not to overwhelm you, just to be here." Tears filled her eyes, unbidden. She blinked quickly, trying to hold them back, but the emotions were too strong. For so long she had carried everything alone. And now, for the first time in a long time, someone was offering something real, something human, something without conditions. She began, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can. If I deserve, you deserve kindness," he interrupted gently. "You deserve care. You deserve someone who sees you. Not the world's idea of you, not the part of you that struggles, not the part that's invisible. Just you." She took a shaky breath, feeling the truth of his words. It was so simple, yet so powerful. She had spent years thinking that kindness and care were things she had to earn, that the world's indifference was permanent. And now, here was someone offering exactly what she had longed for, without judgment or expectation. They talked for hours after that. Not about business, not about wealth, not about appearances. They talked about life, about struggles, about moments that had shaped them, about small dreams they had barely dared to voice. She realized he had lived a life most people only saw in headlines and magazines, but beneath all of that, he was just a person, a human being, with fears, hopes, and a longing for connection that matched her own. At some point, he shared his own loneliness. The kind that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who can't truly see you. The kind that money and success cannot fill. He admitted that he had been searching for something real, something simple, something human. And in her presence, he had found it. She listened quietly, feeling a bond forming, fragile but undeniable. She understood now that he was not perfect, not untouchable, not beyond need. He was human, and in that humanity, she found a strange comfort. The cafe began to close, and they walked out together into the quiet streets. The air was crisp, the snow still lying in soft blankets along the sidewalks. He didn't let go of her hand this time. It wasn't about ownership or control. It was about connection, about being present, about the quiet strength of touch. She stopped near her apartment. The familiar fear creeping back, the fear that this was too good to be true, that she didn't belong in his world, that she would somehow disappoint him, he noticed, reading the hesitation in her eyes. "You don't have to belong anywhere," he said softly. "You just have to be here with me for now. That's enough." Her chest tightened, and she nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know why. I trust you," she admitted, the words almost foreign to her. "I don't know why, but I do." He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Because I am the same," he said. "I trust you too. And I don't know why either, but it feels right. That's all we need to know." For the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of the world on her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the emptiness that money and success had failed to fill. Together, they shared a simple truth: connection, care. and the human heart could reach places nothing else could. Before they parted for the night, he squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise that he would be there without expectation. Without pressure, without conditions. She walked up to her apartment, her steps light, her heart full, her mind quiet for the first time in months. And somewhere in his car, parked on the quiet street, he watched her go, feeling a quiet hope blossom. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that tonight, something real had begun, something fragile, something human, something that might just change everything. Neither of them knew how far this connection would go or what obstacles lay ahead. But for now, they had each other, a hand to hold, a heart to trust, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the simplest gestures the hand offered, the words spoken, the moments shared can become the most extraordinary miracles. And for her, for him, and for the quiet night around them, Christmas had not ended. It had only just begun. She woke on Christmas morning with a feeling she hadn't felt in years, a quiet excitement, gentle and real, that filled her chest in a way the cold and the loneliness never could. The apartment was still modest, small and cold in spots, but the warmth inside her heart made everything feel different. The world outside could still be harsh, but for the first time, she felt ready to meet it. Ready to step into a day that held possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine before. Her morning routine felt lighter. She boiled water for tea, noticing the faint shimmer of sunlight on the countertop. The snow outside had melted slightly overnight, leaving streets wet and bright with reflection. It wasn't perfect. Life still had its challenges. Bills waited. The apartment was small, and her future was uncertain. Yet none of that felt like the end anymore. Christmas, she realized, had not left her. It had just been waiting, hidden behind the gray days, till something or someone reminded her of its quiet magic. She dressed quickly, slipping into warm clothes, and made her way to the street. The city was alive in a soft, gentle way, not the frantic rush she had grown used to. Families strolled together, couples held hands, and laughter spilled from cafes and homes alike. She moved carefully through the snow-slick streets, feeling something new in her chest, anticipation, hope, and a subtle courage she hadn't realized she possessed. As she walked, she thought about him, about the stranger from the cafe who had become something more than a passing moment. She remembered his quiet gestures, the way he had spoken without judgment, the way he had offered his hand, not as a gesture of possession, but of connection. She smiled softly to herself, imagining how strange and wonderful it was that such a small act could change everything. Meanwhile, he was already up, moving through his own Christmas morning in ways that had little to do with wealth or tradition. He didn't rush through gifts or check messages or prepare for meetings. He had chosen instead to step outside, letting the city breathe around him, letting the streets show him life beyond boardrooms and contracts. He thought of her, imagining her smile, imagining her presence, imagining how something so simple had managed to shift the cold inside him. He decided he would find her, not because he needed to impress her, not because he wanted to offer money or luxury, but because he wanted to see her smile, to share a quiet, human moment on this day that was meant for warmth, kindness, and connection. She entered the cafe again, the small bell above the door ringing softly as she stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around her like a hug. She spotted him almost immediately, sitting in the same place as before, a warm smile on his face as he looked up. The sight made her heart leap, an innocent flutter of joy that she hadn't felt in years. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. She moved toward it without hesitation. No words were needed at first. They simply existed together in the quiet cafe. Two people who had found something rare, a connection that transcended backgrounds, wealth, and circumstance. They spoke slowly, gently about the past, the present, and the future. She shared stories from her life, small victories, small losses, moments she had long kept buried. He listened, without judgment, without interruption, offering only his presence, his attention, his understanding. And when it was his turn, he shared truths that he had hidden from the world: loneliness, mistakes, regrets, and the longing for something real in a life filled with everything money could buy except human connection. Time passed, unnoticed. Outside, the snow fell softly again, painting the city in white. But inside, the cafe felt like a small sanctuary. Their words, their laughter, their quiet silences were more valuable than anything either had known before. For her, the loneliness that had weighed so heavily for years seemed to melt a little with each passing moment. For him, the emptiness that had accompanied his wealth felt lighter, filled with something genuine, something human. At one point, she looked at him and laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. It was genuine, unforced, and it lit something in the room. He smiled back, that same warmth she had come to recognize. That same quiet understanding that said, without words, I see you. I understand you. When the cafe started to close for the day, they walked out into the streets together. Snowflakes drifted down again, gentle and quiet, settling softly on their shoulders. The city looked different in this light, brighter, kinder, as if the world itself had softened for this day. He stopped her near a small park, where children played with sleds and families shared moments of laughter. He reached for her hand and she placed hers in his without hesitation. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only trust and understanding. They walked slowly, letting the simple act of holding hands feel like a gift, more valuable than anything wrapped in paper or ribbons. Do you ever feel like this is too much? She asked quietly, glancing at him. Like something this good can't be real? He shook his head gently. No, he said. Not with you. This feels real, and that's enough for me. Her chest tightened, and tears pricked her eyes. I've spent so long thinking kindness and care were things I had to earn, she whispered. But now I see. They're just given sometimes, and it's beautiful. He nodded. Yes, and I think we often forget how simple it can be. We complicate it with expectations, with fear. But what matters? What really matters? Is being present, being human, and caring for one another. They continued walking, silent at times, speaking at others, sharing small stories about life, hopes, and dreams. Every step, every word, every glance built a bridge between them. One that was sturdy because it was grounded in truth, trust, and understanding. By the time they reached her apartment building, the sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the streets. She paused at the door, unsure of how to say goodbye, even for a moment. He looked at her and smiled. I don't want this day to end, he said softly. Not for us. Not now. Then it won't, she replied, a quiet certainty in her voice. We'll keep it. We'll carry it forward, he nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They didn't need grand gestures or promises. The simple acts presence, care, hand in hand, words spoken honestly, were enough to start something lasting. She stepped inside, but not before turning back once. Their eyes met, and in that glance there was no fear, no hesitation, only recognition and hope. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever hardships life might bring, this connection they had found could endure. It was real. It was human. It was rare. He watched her disappear into the building, then turned toward the park, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had discovered something money could never buy, the quiet joy of being seen, understood and connected with another human being in a genuine, unselfish way. That night she wrote again in her notebook. She wrote about snow, about small cafes, about laughter, and about kindness. She wrote about a man who had touched her life simply by being present, by caring without expectation, by seeing her when no one else had. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He returned to his home, a place filled with grandeur and silence, but tonight it felt different. The house felt warmer because her memory, her presence, lingered there. He smiled quietly, thinking about the day, thinking about her, thinking about the simplicity of connection. Money and luxury had never given him this. Only a human heart had. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly unfolded into months. Life remained imperfect, challenging, sometimes difficult. Bills still needed to be paid, work still demanded attention, and the city still carried its harshness. Yet something had changed fundamentally for both of them. They had found a bridge across loneliness, a quiet partnership built on respect, care, and understanding. On Christmas night, she stood at her window, looking out over the city streets, softly lit and quiet under a blanket of snow. She felt warmth in her chest, a deep and steady feeling that had nothing to do with the heater in her apartment. She thought of him, of the cafe, of the hand he had offered, the care he had shown. She realized that Christmas was never truly over. It had only waited for the right moment, the right person, the right connection to remind her of its magic. He, too, looked out from his tall windows, the city stretching beneath him. His life had always been full of power, money, and control, but none of that mattered tonight. What mattered was her smile, her presence, her trust, and the quiet truth that human connection could change lives in ways nothing else could. And in that shared understanding, in that invisible thread between them, the miracle of Christmas lived on not in gifts or grand gestures, but in the simple human acts of seeing, caring, and being present for someone who had been waiting all along. For her. For him, for the quiet city around them, Christmas was alive. It was warm, real, and full of hope. And as the night settled softly over the streets, they both knew that the story they had begun together was only the first chapter of something extraordinary, something human, something that would endure far beyond the fleeting magic of a single day. The days after Christmas passed in a gentle, unhurried rhythm. The city moved on, the streets were busy, and life went on with its usual challenges. But for her, everything had shifted in ways she hadn't imagined possible. She woke each morning with a sense of lightness, carrying in her heart a quiet warmth that had nothing to do with the heater in her apartment or the thin sunlight spilling through the windows. She went about her daily life, running errands, tidying her small space, cooking meals, and checking her small savings, but the weight of loneliness that had defined her existence for so long was lighter. She thought about him constantly, the way he had seen her, the way he had offered kindness without expectation, the way he had held her hand in the snow. Every time she remembered it, her chest felt full in a way she hadn't felt in years. One evening, the weather had turned cold again. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the sky, dusting the streets and rooftops in white. She wrapped herself in a thick coat and stepped outside, drawn inexplicably toward the cafe where they had first met. She didn't know if he would be there, or if the memory was simply guiding her, but her feet carried her along the quiet streets without hesitation. When she arrived, she found him already there, seated at the same table. He looked up, and their eyes met, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. The world around them, the other patrons, the flickering lights, the soft hum of music faded into the background. All that existed was the space between them, filled with trust, care, and an unspoken understanding. "Good evening," he said, a gentle smile on his face. "Good evening," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup of tea the waiter had placed in front of her, letting the heat seep slowly into her fingers. They didn't rush to speak immediately. The silence was comfortable, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they shared. Then he began, speaking softly about the small, ordinary things that had marked his day, details that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else. But to her, they were a window into his humanity. He spoke about the book he had read, a conversation he had overheard, a moment of kindness he had witnessed. She listened carefully, smiling at his observations, noting the thoughtfulness behind his words. It amazed her how someone could be surrounded by so much wealth and power, yet still notice the smallest, most human details. It reminded her that kindness was not about grand gestures or money. It was about paying attention, about caring, about noticing another person in the midst of life's chaos. Then she spoke, sharing her own small stories, her own quiet observations of the world. She told him about the snow, about a stray cat she had seen near her apartment, about the woman in the park who handed out warm food to those who had none. He listened intently, never interrupting, never judging, offering only the presence and attention she had longed for. Hours passed unnoticed. The cafe's lights dimmed and the streets outside darkened under the winter sky. They remained seated, their conversation flowing naturally, filled with laughter, small confessions, and shared silences that felt safe. It was extraordinary in its simplicity, a rare and fragile thing that neither had expected to find as they left the cafe together. The air was cold, and snowflakes began to fall once more. He offered her his coat, but she shook her head, smiling. "I want to feel the snow," she said softly. He nodded, understanding immediately, and they walked side by side through the quiet streets. The snowflakes landed gently on their shoulders, melting slightly as they touched warm skin. They spoke little, letting the world speak for them, the crunch of snow beneath their feet. The distant laughter of children, the faint glow of streetlights, reflected in icy puddles. At one point, she stopped, looking up at the sky. "Do you ever think about how strange life is?" she asked. "How it can feel so cold and empty, and then, all of a sudden, someone appears, and everything changes." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's like a small miracle. One moment you're alone and the next, something or someone reminds you that life can still be beautiful, even in the smallest ways." They continued walking until they reached a small park, dusted with fresh snow. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and the trees were heavy with frost, their branches sparkling in the weak light. He stopped, taking her hand gently. She felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest. "I want you to know," he said, his voice low and steady, "that everything we've shared, it's real for me. I don't expect anything from you. I just want to be here, to share moments like this, to be present with you. That's all I ask." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I've spent so long waiting for something real, and I didn't know it could feel like this." He smiled softly. "It can," he said, "and it will, as long as we choose to see it, to hold on to it, to care for each other without trying to fix everything or change the world." She squeezed his hand, a quiet agreement passing between them. In that simple gesture, there was trust, understanding, and a commitment to the human connection that had grown between them. Neither needed words beyond that. The warmth of their hands, the rhythm of their steps together, and the quiet shared breath of the winter air said everything. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of life continued, but nothing felt the same. She walked to work with a lightness in her step, noticing the world around her, the laughter of children, the kindness of strangers, the small moments of beauty that had once gone unnoticed. He moved through his life differently too, carrying her presence in his thoughts, letting her memory influence the way he treated people, the way he noticed the small human details that truly mattered. One evening, as snow began to fall again, he invited her to a quiet dinner in a small cozy restaurant, far from the bustling streets. It wasn't extravagant or flashy. It was simple, warm, and intimate, a place where they could speak freely, laugh, and be themselves. She arrived early, nervous but excited, and he was already waiting, smiling as she approached. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing easily, filled with laughter, shared memories, and quiet reflections. She noticed the way he listened, really listened, and she realized how rare that was. So few people paid attention without judgment, without trying to control or influence, and she felt grateful, almost overwhelmed. By his care as the evening went on, the snow fell heavier outside, covering the city in a soft, quiet blanket. They stepped outside together, the cold nipping at their cheeks, but the warmth between them kept the chill at bay. He took her hand again, and they walked slowly, letting the quiet intimacy of the night wrap around them. At one point he stopped, turning to face her. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly. "I don't know where life will take us, what challenges we'll face, or how the world will change. But I do know that I want to face it with you. That's all I know, and it's enough for me." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to be here, with you, through whatever comes." He smiled, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was simple, tender, and full of promise. In that moment, everything felt right. The loneliness, the fear, the uncertainty, they all seemed distant, replaced by a quiet hope, a steady warmth. And the knowledge that they had found something rare and real in each other, they walked back to her apartment together, the city quiet and soft around them. Inside, she felt the comfort of home, but it was different now. Her space felt brighter, warmer, filled with the energy of hope and connection. They sat together, talking quietly, planning small adventures, sharing dreams and thoughts they had long kept to themselves. The days passed, and with each one, their bond grew stronger. They laughed, they shared silences, they faced challenges together, supporting each other without pressure, without judgment, with nothing but care and understanding. Life remained imperfect, unpredictable, and sometimes difficult. But they discovered that human connection could soften even the hardest moments, bringing warmth, courage, and joy where there had been only cold and isolation. Months later, as winter gave way to the first signs of spring, she stood at her window. Looking out over the city streets now bright with sunlight and new life, she felt a quiet gratitude in her heart, a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She thought about the snowy night in the cafe, about the hand offered, the kindness shared, and the trust that had grown between them. She smiled softly, knowing that life had a way of surprising us, of giving us moments of magic when we least expect them. He, too, looked out from his window, feeling the same quiet joy. He realized that the greatest gift he had ever received was not wealth, not success, not power, but the human connection he had found. Fragile, beautiful, and real, with someone who saw him for who he truly was and allowed him to see her in return. And in that shared understanding, in the quiet trust and care they had built, they discovered the true meaning of Christmas, not the gifts, not the decorations, not the fleeting celebrations, but the simple, enduring miracle of being seen, of being valued, of being loved in the quiet. A human way that lasts long after the snow has melted and the season has passed. For her, for him, and for the life they were beginning to build together, Christmas was no longer a single day. It was a feeling, a connection, a promise that kindness, care, and love could arrive unexpectedly, change everything, and continue to grow in the smallest, most human ways. And as the city moved quietly around them, she knew with certainty that she would never feel alone again, because someone had taken her hand, truly, wholly, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, hope, trust, and a love that could survive anything.